This is Glenn Loury here at Brown University and the Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv, talking with Dean Baker, Dean, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so Dean, I thought we might have a brief chat. We've only got a few minutes available about the near-term prospects for useful legislation on the economic policy front in virtue of the recent election results where the Republicans have now seized control of both houses of Congress, et cetera. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, I can't say I'm too optimistic on the legislative front. I mean, just as backdrop, the question is where we stand in terms of the economy. Yeah. And no doubt this is an important factor in the election that clearly, in the polls showing, this isn't my speculation, the economy was a very important issue. Most people rate it as the most important issue. And most of the people who were concerned about the economy said they didn't think it was going very well. And my bottom line on that, my takeaway is that I think most people don't feel very good about their jobs. They don't feel secure in their jobs. They aren't seeing wage growth. They aren't moving up the income ladder. And that's clearly, cause of dissatisfaction for most of the public. I assume that was a major factor in the Republican victory. So the question is that likely to turn around anytime soon? And, again, part of that's what's the movement in the economy, and then what Congress and the president are likely to do about it. In terms of the movement in the economy, I'm moderately optimistic. We have been seeing good job growth. I think people get overly enthusiastic because we've seen so much real bad job growth. So you see 230,000 jobs a month, and people think that's great. And, it's certainly better than what we had, but given the depth of the downturn, it still will take us a long time to get back to anything resembling full employment or capacity. So that's going in the right direction. But it's not likely to lead to much of a turnaround in terms of stronger wage growth. I don't see that at least for, say, another year, maybe even 2 years. So I think most people are not likely to feel too much better about the economy based on just the course, continuation. Where do we look to be going in 2015 into 2016? Legislatively, are we going to see anything? There's nothing I think that's likely to jump out that will be big. One possibility that I think will help, a substantial number of people, but these are more at the lower end, or almost by definition at the lower end, the minimum wage. That is something that President Obama pushed, that the Democrats had pushed. There were a number of state ballot initiatives raising state minimum wages. They all passed. I think there were 5 of them. So I think we may see something on that. President Obama has been putting forward 10-10 as his target to hit in 2 years or 3 years. Probably would not get that. The Republicans may agree to a lower target. I'm basing that partly on the past precedent that, President Bush, of course, did sign a minimum wage bill, and the Gingrich Congress, after Gingrich took over as Speaker in 1994, they also pushed through a minimum wage bill. So that's the one thing that I look to where I think there can be, some improvement in wages. Obviously, again, that's a relatively small segment of the labor market, people at the bottom. It can mean a lot to them, but it's not going to affect, say, someone who's working at the median wage.
Well, I have 2 questions for you. One specifically about the minimum wage, which is basically, do you really think that the impact of an increase in the minimum wage can make that much of a difference to the character or quality of the lives of, most people who are working at the low end of the labor market? There are the offsetting disemployment effects, the size of which are in dispute, or the existence of which, I suppose, for some people are in dispute. But it is, as you've said, a pretty small part of the labor force. So if that's what we're left with, it seems pretty paltry. And then the other question has to do with why wages have been so stagnant for so long as a general matter. And maybe you could address both of those.
Yeah, well, in terms of the minimum wage, I wouldn't exaggerate its importance. I think it does help a substantial number of people. We're talking millions of people. It's a labor force of 150 million. So, if you're talking 3, 4, 5 million, that's not that large in the scheme of things. The disemployment effects, I'm of the view I don't think there's zero, but I think, based on a lot of research, including by critics of the minimum wage, I think that they tend to be relatively small. The high end, Newmark and Walsher, their data puts it at, 10 to 15% reduction in work relative to the size of the increase. So in other words, if we have an increase in the minimum wage of, say, 30%, roughly what we're presumably talking about, then we're looking at a decline in the number of jobs on the order of 3 to 4.5%. That looks like still a pretty good deal to me. I mean, what that typically would mean is not so much that people are being fired, but really there's less job creation, and these are high turnover jobs. So that would mean that it's a little bit longer between jobs. You quit your job or whatever reason, you leave your job, and it takes you an extra week or something to get a new job. But when you do, you're getting paid 25, 30% more. I feel comfortable saying that is definitely helping people. That's in the right direction. Again, I can't say no one's going to be a loser in that story. We don't have policies where literally no one's a loser.
Well, not all of those people are poor.
Absolutely. But one of the things that is striking, and this gets your second question about the reason for stagnant wages, is that a lot of people that we would have thought as being, more middle end, a lot of people even with college degrees are now working at jobs that maybe not exactly minimum wage jobs, but near minimum wage jobs, people with kids. So, you do still have the classic case of, the middle class family where, the kid works after school at a fast food restaurant, and that's not a high priority, but that really is the exception these days. For the most part, we are talking about older people, even people with college degrees. We did analysis of fast food workers, and somewhere in the order of 15% of the people working at fast food restaurants now have college degrees. I think that's an artifact of the recession, but point is these people would be helped. So it's not. Most of the people who would benefit from a minimum wage boost are not the middle class kids getting spending money after school.
Okay, now I'm interrupting because you haven't answered the second question yet. But if you would bear with me, I have this kind of academic economist instinct that there's no free lunch. People say give America a raise, and I'm not against increasing the minimum wage. I mean, ideologically, I don't have any sort of free market commitments that say you can't raise the minimum wage. But the question is, what will be the effects? Who will benefit, and at what cost? There's no free lunch, so we can't give America a raise without somebody paying for it. We'd like to think that it's going to be the profiteering Walmart stockholders who are going to pay for it. But competitive markets being what they are, it's more likely at the end of the day to be the customer who patronizes places whose prices are going to have to be higher in virtue of the fact that their costs have gone up, who will pay for it. That seems never to get mentioned when we talk about giving America a raise, as if you could simply legislate more money for people's pockets without there being any negative consequence. I haven't done so.
Yeah, well, I understand the politicians don't want to mention, but no, look, my ballpark numbers, and this is not based on my own research, but other research I read. Probably 30 to 40% gets passed on in higher prices. Somewhere around 30 to 40% will come out of profits. At the WalMarts. Some cases, where you're talking about a smaller, family-owned businesses. Some of these will go out of business. I mean, you can't say no one's going to go out of business. I mean, these go out of business all the time. In some cases, that will mean the margin. So that will be part of the story. And some of that, there is evidence that you get increases in productivity. And the basic story here, I mean, there are different reasons for thinking that, but the most obvious one, it does reduce turnover, and turnover is a very substantial cost. So I think, you will definitely see a substantial portion of it passed on in higher prices. Some of it will come out of Walmart's profits. I think, Walmart is earning, above the competitive level of profits at this point. So I think they can withstand some cut to their profits and not go out of business. But undoubtedly, some will be the case where you have, small family-owned businesses, and they're just struggling now. And, anything, if their electric bill goes up, they're going to go out of business. And, if they have to pay their workers more, some of those places will go out of business.
Okay, so we got a few minutes here, only a few minutes. Talk some about wage stagnation and what you think the fundamental forces are that are at work there.
I think a number of different forces. I mean, one of the ones I've been very impressed with, I did a short book last year with my friend Jared Bernstein on full employment and benefits of full employment. And what we were really struck by is that there's a very strong correlation between unemployment rates and wage growth. And we were really struck in the late 90s when you got the unemployment rate well below what people had thought was possible. The conventional wisdom at the start of the decade, or middle of the decade even, was that the unemployment rate couldn't get below 6% without triggering inflation. And of course, we got down to 4% as a year-round average in 2000. And that was the only period that we saw substantial wage growth up and down the wage ladder since the early 70s. So you saw even strong wage growth at the 10th percentile, 20th percentile of the wage distribution. And in fact, it was stronger at the bottom than at the middle and the top. So I think that's been a very big part of the story, that we've had higher than necessary rates of unemployment really for most of the last 3 decades. And one of the things, very, very simple thing we did in that book was we just looked at the estimates of the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. This is taken from the Congressional Budget Office, and we just compared the actual rate to their estimated NARU, the non-accelerating rate. And if you look at that over the 3 decades from 1950 to 1980, we were on average somewhat below, about a half, 3/4 of a percentage point below their estimate of the NARU, whereas in the decades since 1980, we were over a percentage point above their estimate of the NARU. So I think that's been a big part.
Excuse me, Dean, we should tell people that the NARU is the natural rate of unemployment that the economists talk about, at which there is no accelerating inflation.
That's right. So the NARU is in principle what we think of. Well, if we have the number right, that's the lowest we could get the unemployment rate without the inflation rate continually accelerating. So we can't consistently be below the NARU. So that's, I think, a big part of the story. But there are certainly other factors. Clearly, at least to my view, weaker unions. The unionization rate in private sector was over 20% back in 1980. Today, it's less than 7%. So clearly, that's, at least for a lot of workers in the middle of the income distribution, I think had a downward impact on their wages. Trade has been a very, very big factor. And I think here it's important to point out, we've decided that, people talk about globalization as being a natural phenomena. We decided what sorts of items we would trade. And our agreements have really been focused on manufactured goods, whereas you could easily envision trade policy that's, say, focused on having, doctors, lawyers, make it easier for them to come into the United States and work as doctors and lawyers. And, of course, driving down the wages of doctors and lawyers, there'd be benefits for consumers who pay less for our health care, our legal services, other professional services. But in any case, that wasn't the direction that trade agreements went. So those would be my top items. I mean, I can give you a longer list.
I have a friend who's a Bengali economist. There are a lot of them, you may know that. Who opined to me once in a meeting of economics faculty around the lunch table that, if we allowed free trade in the services of economic analysts and teachers, none of us would be would be making 6 figures and living in big houses, because people who are working for $20,000 a year would take all of our jobs away. They happen to live in the east of India, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, it's not that, I've had similar discussions with economists, and they invariably point to me, so-and-so's from India, and go, yeah, I could find, outstanding Indian economists who, work very hard. They're very bright, very accomplished, and they're able to work in the United States. But the fact of the matter is, your average Indian economist, who might be every bit as good as your average economist in the United States, they're not going to be able to come over here and take a job, from you and me. So there are very substantial obstacles there, and that's not, that wasn't a natural phenomena. That was, a political decision that we wanted to break down the barriers in manufactured goods so that it's easy to import steel or cars or clothes from, whatever country. But many of the barriers in professional services are still there, and in some cases even stronger than what they were 20 years ago.
Well, why isn't this an argument for lowering all of the barriers rather than for erecting barriers for manufacturers?
Oh, I see it absolutely as an argument for that. I mean, at this point, one could have had the argument, you go back to NAFTA 20 years ago, was that, a good thing to do or not? You could have that argument, but that's historical. We've done that, and I don't think it's a serious argument to say we're going to reverse it. So I very much say, yes, lower the barriers. Let's make it easier for doctors to educate to our standards, just to be clear, because I say this and they said, we're going to have people who are, Indian doctors, we don't know they're trained as well. We'll set the standards, that's fine, but there should be transparency so that, a smart kid in India could know, okay, I take this course, that course, and then I'm going to pass an exam, and then I can come and work in the United States just like someone who's born in New York or LA. So I absolutely, I think that's the direction to go. Again, we could have the historical argument, but that's just, of historical interest because we can't change the past. That's history.
Now, the wage stagnation factors that you've been mentioning, like the decline of unions, the effects of goods coming in offshore, from offshore, and the general slackness of demand for labor because we've had relatively high unemployment. They're all demand side factors. Now, what about on the supply side? What about education and training, apprenticeship, other kind of programmatic interventions that you could imagine would make people more employable and employable at higher wages?
Well, I think there's a lot we can do on the supply side, but I guess I just make 2 points on that. One is that those aren't short term. I mean, let's say we do these, we do them well, because no guarantee we will do. That's not a reason not to do them, just to be clear. But, there's no guarantee, because we have talked about, any number of efforts to improve the education system over the last 2 decades. I mean, the first President Bush dubbed himself the education president. So this goes back, and I'm not going to say there's no success, but I don't think people could look at our schools today and think they're hugely better than they were, back in, say, 1990. So, by all means, we should try to look that way. But even in a best case scenario, it's a long-term story. The other part is I'm always hesitant to carry that too far, because you could look at stories, even people who have college degrees have seen no increase in wages over the last, I think since 2000. I'd have to double check the exact year. But, basically we've seen wage stagnation hit pretty high up the income distribution. So again, I would tell anyone, if I was giving advice to a student who's trying to decide whether to go to college or not, by all means, go to college. You're better off going to college than not going to college, and certainly the vast majority of cases. But I don't think that explains, the fact that we don't have a well-educated workforce, or one as well-educated as we might like it to be. I don't think that explains wage stagnation.
Yeah. Listen, I need to apologize to you and to our audience at the fact that this interesting conversation is going to have to be terminated at this point. Perhaps we can take it up again sometime in the near future, but I'm committed to get to another place right now.
Okay, well, thanks, Glenn. I'm sorry it had to be cut short as well, and I hope we'll have another occasion.